Hello, everybody, and good afternoon. Hope you're doing well, all of you, and welcome to Doing Business in France and Germany together with our partners, Business Sweden, both in Germany and France, and also our guest, Jon from Ekkono. I think we can start, and I know that there will be some other people joining by time. So let's get started to this 1 hour session. The purpose of this session is also to give you information about how to access the German and the French market and things that you need to think about. And our partners, Business Sweden, have that knowledge and can share it with you. So the agenda is a short introduction and welcome. Then we're gonna do the presentation from Business Sweden, both in France and Germany, and start up with Ekkono and their perspective and their journey that they have done in this matter, with a short Q&A in the end. And a little bit about why we're doing it, because we have a European Startup Match Day next week, French corporates and German corporates in this matter that will participate with Swedish startups. And as you see here, our both Business Sweden is our partners in this matter, appliedAI thinks, and of course appliedAI in this matter. It's funded by Vinnova, the Swedish innovation agency, and the theme is Connected Futures. Couple of words about Ignite Sweden. We're a non-profit organization. We started it, it was initiated 2017. And what our mission and goal is to foster commercial collaborations between startups, scale-ups, and corporates. And for 2 years ago, also working with public organizations such as municipalities. We are under the umbrella of Swedish Incubators and Science Parks, the member organization for the Swedish innovation ecosystem. We work very closely to our incubators and science parks in Sweden in this matter to onboard new startups, new technologies to our matchmakings, with focus on creating commercial collaborations. And as I said, it's funded by Vinnova, Sweden's innovation agency, and also the Swedish Energy Agency. And of course, we have members from the corporate side and the public side in this matter. So we have done this since 2017. We have done over 5,000 meetings, and we are happy about that. Of course, we have almost worked with 1,000 startups. We have a database with 2,500 startups. And 255 corporates and 40 public organizations. And we have done this also internationally. As I said, we will have a matchmaking between Swedish startups and French corporates and German corporates next week. And we have done that also in Canada, Brazil, India, and so on. We're happy to tell you, of course, for us, it's very important to everything that we do is focused on commercial collaborations. And one KPI that we follow up is how many follow up the corporates and the municipalities actually with the startups after our matchmakings. And that number is 50% of the meetings goes into a next step. And so far we have done almost 350 commercial collaborations and still focusing on that, of course. With commercial collaborations, we mean that it needs to be some kind of money involved from the corporate or the public organization to create businesses between startup scale-ups and corporate and municipalities or public organizations. And we do that by a specific process, as you see it here, in 5 steps, beginning with the activation part, going into to identify needs and challenges from the corporates and the public organizations. When we have these, we can immediately start to match technologies from Sweden, startups and scale-ups that can actually solve these challenges, partly or the whole challenge, of course. And then we organize the match day, and that's what's going to happen next week. We prepare both corporate side and the startup side in this matter to create the best possibilities to do great matchmaking. And then we analyze and follow up with the corporates and the public organizations of how many of these startups that were actually interested in going into next step with for doing a commercial pilot. Each meeting is 20-minute efficient meetings, and we have a specific meeting structure of how we do these meetings and try to support and coach the startups before a match day. And of course, we in long term, we evaluate this and follow up to see what kind of commercial collaborations there is on the table. Usually it takes 6 to 9 months, but we have startups that have made it faster, and also sometimes it takes longer time. We need, of course, to have respect for the initiation and the design of the pilot. With that said, my name is Hassan Shaba. I work as Director for International Cooperation at SISP, Swedish Incubators and Science Box, and is COO of Ignite Sweden. Happy to have you all here. And just short last picture, not going super much in it, but typical matchmaking is between an existing problem and an existing solution where the typical matchmaking happens. But we also see that there's a lot of rerouting and integrating in the matter of when a startup and a corporate meet and they discuss the pilots, we can see other possibilities of adapting the startup solutions to new problems, for example. So for us, it's of big importance that we push the open-mindedness of working with startups and having an internal open innovation process for both the corporates and the public organizations. This four-fielder is actually the value that we are creating. We had a research team that followed us for over 100 meetings and designed this four-fielder of the value that we try to create between startup scale-ups and corporates and public organizations. So happy to have you all here, and we will immediately begin with our first guest here, Emma Henningsson from Business Sweden France, a Senior Project Manager, Business Sweden. Emma, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sasan. And actually, Sophia and I, we have merged our presentations. So, and we've switched the orders. We would actually like to start with Germany, if that's all right with you. But we'll do it together, so it doesn't change anything.
Yeah. I will start to share my screen and see how it works. Are we there? Let's see.
Yet, but
no. Do you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yes, but let's start with presenting ourselves. And since I'm going to start, I can say, my name is Sofia Svensson, and I am working at the Berlin office in Germany for Business Sweden. I've been at Business Sweden for almost a year now, and helping companies as well as large corporates, but also a lot of startups and SMEs and scale-ups in all kinds of industries that we're working with. Emma, do you want to introduce yourself now, or do you want to take it with your presentation?
Well, I can just say hi. And so my name is Emma Henningsson, and I work as a Senior Project Manager in our Paris office. And I can talk a little bit more about what we do in Paris and what we're focusing on when it's time for France. Perfect. Thank you, Sophia.
Perfect. Okay, so before we dig deeper into the German and French market, we'd just like to present Business Sweden a bit closer and what we do and our offerings. Some of you might already familiar with the service of Business Sweden and the company, but for those of you who are not, I would like to shortly present Business Sweden and what we do and how we can support you and your companies. So we have our HQ in Stockholm, but most of our colleagues, they're positioned in all over the world in over 40 markets where we are operating. And we are locally positioned as we want to give hands-on support and local insights. And our focus is always to have the colleagues who speak the local language, since we know that speaking the local language that can lower the barrier and open the doors of international markets expansions, and especially in more traditional markets such as Germany and France. And we are present on most of the large trading market and areas, and we have around 400 people on our offices around the world on the local markets. And Business Sweden is actually half state-owned, which gives us the possibility to offer services that are subsidized for small to medium-sized companies. And we are operating in all kind of industries, which you can see on the left side on the presentation. So our Business Sweden is built on 7 ecosystems, which is smart industry, smart transport, we have smart energy, new materials, digital technologies, life science, and creative industries. So we're basically covering all of the trading areas that you need support in. And the services that we offer is market expansion. We have sales acceleration, we have business to government, and business incubations and operations. But we're actually quite flexible with our projects, and we'll tailor-make them after each company and their requirements and needs. And we can provide you, for example, with a market analysis or market information. We do partner search, salary administration, incorporations, or basically anything that you need support in within the local market. And let's look a bit closer. I would also like to briefly go into how we can support the small and medium-sized companies to establish themselves internationally, and especially with a focus on the subsidized services that we have in Sweden. So since we are half state-owned, we have the opportunity to offer subsidized services, which means that the state accounts for usually half of the cost of the projects. So this could, for example, be that we act as an extended sales arm for the Swedish company, or we do larger market analysis for you. So in addition, there's also cost-free service offers, such as our so-called export validation. We also do export coaching, which is a short analysis of the selected questions from your company. We also do trade fair support. And if you have questions about the logistics and certification, we have our own export technical department that supports you free of charge. And for startup and scale-ups, we also have the LEAP Accelerator program and the Catalyst projects, which is business development. We do strategic advice and workshops, respectively tailored projects and acceleration in selected markets. And we also have our so-called Go Global tool, which is an interactive tool to boost your knowledge about our global business development. And I can also recommend you to check our guides on our website. Some of them are free of charge. We have, for example, the e-commerce guide and export guide, where you find a lot of useful information for your company when you want to go international. So that's some background on Business Sweden, but let's do a deeper dive into the German market. So starting with some basic facts that some of you might already know, but Germany has around 83 million inhabitants and is actually home to more than a quarter of the whole European GDP. And this country is the largest economy in the whole of Europe, and actually number 4 if you count in the whole world. So that's why we sometimes like to call Germany the economic engine of Europe. There are actually several federal states in Germany which has a higher GDP than the whole Sweden in total. We have, for example, North Rhine-Westphalia, we have Bayern, we have Baden-Württemberg. So their GDP separately is actually larger than the whole Sweden's GDP. And Germany is also considered one of the most international economies globally. So approximately 50% of the annual GDP, which is around $1.5 trillion US, is exported to other countries in Germany or from Germany. And in Germany, we have around 3.5 million companies operating on the German market, whereas more than 70,000 are foreign, and almost all of the companies in Germany are SMEs, considered to be SMEs. And Germany has, over time, they have a stable business environment. They have a high investment rate for construction, infrastructure. They have stable politics, state finance, and a strong job creation, and also a very strong domestic demand. And the unemployment rate has actually been stable and fairly low during the past decade. And good to know is that Germany's largest employer is Volkswagen, and they have around 300,000 employees in Germany only. And the largest sector in the German economy is the service sector. It accounts for almost 70% of the whole GDP, followed by industry or manufacturing. They stand for around a fourth of the GDP, followed by construction, which is around 6%. On this picture, we have something that we like to call the German banana. And I guess you can see why, but this is where the industry clusters are located. So as mentioned, Germany, they have a very large and important service sector, but the German economy is, however, built on manufacturing industry with a large automotive industry, which I guess most of you are familiar with already. We have a lot of machinery and equipment industry, and also mechanical and electrical engineering companies. And the characteristic of the German market and the German companies especially is that they're very highly organized. There is usually a trade association for every niche and every industry that you can find in Germany. So you can find a trade association for everything you need and also for everything you don't need, which can surprise you sometimes. But the main clusters in Germany are within the areas of production and engineering. We have science, IT technologies, micro, nano, and optical technologies, as well as transport and mobility. And I think some of these cities are, of course, familiar to you. For example, in Frankfurt, we have the main cluster of the banking and finance. In Munich, of course, we have the automotive, as well as in Stuttgart. And Hamburg is more PR, marketing, ICT, and of course the cargo and the, as we have a huge harbor there. So that's a bit on the landscape in Germany and the industry clusters. And this is an expression which I think is very German, the Mittelstand. I don't know if you have heard it before, but it's quite hard to translate exactly, but the Mittelstand represents the smaller and the medium-sized companies in Germany, which we saw in the beginning of the presentation is almost all of the companies that are operating in Germany. And there is a pride of being in Mittelstand in Germany, as that's the backbone of the German business landscape. So most Mittelstand companies, they're family owned, and they imply a long-term perspective on investments and high level of equity. And the Mittelstand is typically very specialized in a certain industry or a certain product or service. And they also have a high number of patents and innovation in Germany. And what's good to know is that the Mittelstand is not typically represented in big cities like Berlin, Munich, Frankfurt, rather the small cities. So it's important to don't forget about them just because you don't see them in the big cities. This is very common in Germany and very typical for the Mittelstand. So taking a look at the trading balance between Sweden and Germany. Actually, Germany is Sweden's most important trading partner. We're importing almost 16% of goods and services from Germany, and we're exporting around 11% to Germany. So that makes Germany on top of the list both of import and export to Sweden. And Germany's main import from Sweden is pulp and paper. We have machines and machine technology, vehicles, metals, as well as also chemicals and pharmaceutical products. And what Sweden imports from Germany is mainly machines, vehicles, and components, as well as increasing share actually of foodstuff. And currently we have around 1,500 Swedish companies being active in Germany and around 1,000 German companies being active in Sweden. And as you all know from last year or the last 2 years, COVID, Germany, they got their recovery and resilience plan from the EU, and they got it accepted last year of 28 billion euros from the EU recovery plan and the EU recovery fund, which is supposed to be spent in Germany between last year and 2027. And here you can just see a bit like how much Germany is investing and in what sectors. As in total, almost 90% of the whole budget, recovery and resilience budget, goes to digitalization and climate protection for growth and employment. So yes, of course, the green part is a huge part for Germany, but the digitalization is well needed. So that's also why a large amount of the money is invested in digitalization in basically all kind of industries. Okay, so let's have a look in doing business in Germany and what we can provide you for information on that. Actually, we have a short summary of the yearly business climate survey that was conducted in Germany this year. And I would just briefly like to summarize the survey results to you. So if we look back 1 year, 61% of the companies in our sample, they enjoyed a profitable 2021. And the business climate is perceived as good or to very good from our sample, which is a huge improvement from last year, which of course has natural explanations due to COVID. But if we're taking a look forward, 69% of the sample, they expect their industry's turnover to increase in 2022, and 56% they plan to increase their investments in Germany. So in general, the advantages of the German market is a stable economy and a favorable infrastructure, and of course a vast market of 83 million inhabitants. So in all, we have very good market conditions, but the disadvantages is a low level of digitalization. But as we just saw on the previous slide, it's a work in progress, and huge investments are being made to digitalize Germany. And actually, if you scan the QR code here on the screen, you can come directly to the full business climate survey. You can also find it on the Business Sweden website for all the countries that have conducted it. So tips is to go in there and you will find very useful information and good notes about each market. But taking a deeper dive into the climate survey, so as you can imagine from the name of the report, one of the most important questions, of course, is that we ask the participant how they perceive the business climate in Germany. And this year, over half of the respondents rated the business climate as very good or good, which is an increase from both previous year result and the showing a real improvements from, especially from 2020, where only 34% of respondents rated business climate as poor in Germany due to COVID and due to the digitalization. Of course, it was a huge change for the Germans, coming from mainly paperwork and not so digitalized, and they had to fit into the digital climate, which was a huge step to the Germans. But we're getting there slowly. An upward trend of the result is impressive, especially when considering that the 2021 global pandemic was still continuing, as mentioned. But overall, this indicates that Germany has been successful in maintaining a strong business climate despite a global uncertainty, and also despite their low digitalization just 2 years ago. They've made huge steps since then. And as Germany is Sweden's most important trade partner, it is encouraging that Swedish companies that view the business climate so positively, especially when even the growing uncertainty in Europe as a result of the war in Ukraine. So taking a look at the doing business physically in Germany and the business culture, how it looks like. So companies in Germany, they're typically very hierarchically organized, and the business culture is perceived as what we call masculine in Germany, whereas Swedish companies and the Swedish business culture is more feminine. And important business decisions are taken by the leading executives in Germany. You have to get through to the very, very high decision maker in order to get any decisions made or to get any business done. And this makes decision making very long and formalistic and not so flexible in Germany. So it's good to be aware of that just because you get a contact person at one company, it doesn't mean that you have finalized your business. You really have to come to the executives. And the executives they're often technical experts. They have an engineering mentality and background, but they have a limited international experience, but long time career inside the company and inside Germany usually. But good to know is that every executive, they usually have their own secretary, and the secretary to the CEO or to the executives, they're called the spiders in the web because they're the ones that actually forward the meetings. They're the one that consider if it's a meeting worth to take to the CEO, if this is business that they want to do overall. So just getting a contact person in the assistant or the secretary is a huge step, and that gives you access to the actual executive. And here you can see a brief overview just to get a picture of how Sweden and Germany differs in the business culture. So especially within formality, Germany is more formal. Some of you might already know that, but we use titles when we talk to people that we don't know. And also if someone has a doctor's degree, you call them doctor and then the last name. Whereas in Sweden, it doesn't matter what level you talk to, you always use just the name. In Germany, we use the last name and we use the titles. For example, we like to call them Mr. or Mrs., which is Frau and Herr in Germany. Sorry? Hold on. Okay, and one final step that I can recommend you to for just actually to lower the barrier in Germany, that is to apply for a scholarship in the foundation we have called Svensk-Tyska Språkfonden. They offer scholarships every year in business German. The courses though require some prior knowledge, but if you have been studying German or you know some German or you used to work with German companies, this is actually highly recommended for you to improve your business German and improve how you communicate with German companies and German executives. You can find more information on the website, but actually we just finished one course for the spring, but we have courses upcoming in the autumn. So it's highly recommended if you want to improve your business German and improve how to do business in Germany. Yes, that was everything about the German market. So I will give the word to Emma to present France.
All right, thank you very much, Sophia. And of course, there's a Q&A at the end of the entire session. So if you have any questions about Germany that you didn't have the time to, or the opportunity to ask now, there will be an occasion later. All right, so as I mentioned, my name is Emma Hemmingsen and I work as Senior Project Manager at Business Sweden in Paris. I've been in Paris for over 10 years now, working with Swedish companies of all sizes in all industries, focusing on healthcare and life sciences, which is one of the focus areas for our office. But we also focus a lot on energy, transport and mobility, a lot of tech, digital tech, etc. So it's quite broad. We're 12 people in Paris at the moment. So it's one of the larger offices in Europe, which was not the case when I started about 10 years ago. So I think that says something, maybe as a sort of to take the temperature on the Swedish view on France's market, because there's a lot more happening now than it was a while ago. So, and maybe some of the answers can be found in this presentation, we'll see. So France is, of course, a very large market. It's almost 70 million people living. The economy is driven by domestic consumption, even though the defense sector and the aviation sector are very export driven, of course, but it has a very strong domestic market. Actually, France is home to Europe's largest aviation and nuclear industries, but the industry is very diversified, and there are, if we look at where the Swedish companies that we're in contact with are active, it's in most sectors, actually. There are large investments currently in high-tech industry and the digitalization across all sectors. There is a significant, actually, relaunch package after the COVID, after the worst part of the COVID pandemic, we should say and hope, both funded by national funds and EU funds, focusing on the green transition specifically, and also there's also a large focus on reforming the healthcare sector, which is actually lagging a bit behind, especially when it comes to digitalization and also coordination, cost with the costs are going through the roof. So this is something that's being addressed currently. What can we say about, so France is Sweden's 8th biggest trading partner, so not at all as big as Germany, but very important nonetheless. And there are about 600 Swedish companies that have local establishments here. So it's quite a large market. And like I said, we see a huge increase in the interest for France as a market from Swedish companies in all sectors. Right, so what we could also mention is that since we mentioned it for Germany, is that so France, the GDP of France is about 1/5 of the whole Euro GDP. So it's also quite not as large as Germany, but quite significant. We can go to the next slide. So there's quite a lot happening, like I mentioned. I mean, all of you are probably familiar with the recent the political and economic developments. We just recently had President Emmanuel Macron re-elected, and he just formed his government with a new prime minister, who is actually a former minister for transport, and well, she's a veteran in the government. But we have the parliament elections coming up in a week or two, in about 10 days, and there we can actually see the polarization of the French economy or the French political landscape, with the left and green actually joining forces to sort of combat and be a weight against the extreme right influence, which is also growing. France. It's been considered by most. If you speak to Swedish companies that are present here, for example, I think that they would probably agree with me when they say that there have been many reforms that have simplified doing business in France, especially when it comes to hiring and. Well, there's been an increase in flexibility on the labor market that has been very, very difficult, actually, for foreign companies and French companies alike. There have been reductions in corporate tax rates and also some reduced taxes on capital in order to stimulate the economy that way. So, and Macron is also very European friendly, and the policy that he promotes is, I mean, you can definitely see that. So this is something that has been quite beneficial for Swedish companies, because also Sweden has a very good reputation and has worked as a role model for many of the policies that Macron has pulled through. So let's go to the next slide. So like I mentioned, there are some of the industries that are, I mean, the largest industries for aviation, for nuclear, second largest for food and chemical. I mean, it's a really large market with big opportunities. It's also a very large pharmaceutical industry, and it has very high foreign investment. High rate of filed patents. Is a very innovative market, so it's not only, I mean, there's a lot of innovation happening, a lot of technological progress, several unicorns that have arisen from the French tech phenomena, and I mean, things are really happening here. Since Brexit, also Paris is positioning itself as I guess in competition with some German cities as the new EU financial center. I don't have any recent numbers on how that's going, but they're positioning themselves quite fiercely. So there's a large focus on that, and a large focus on promoting startups and tech, basically. And just to give you a reference, I mean, the Paris region, both in terms of population and GDP, is larger than all of Sweden. So it's quite a significant market. So Paris, I mean, France is very centralized. A lot of headquarters are in Paris. A lot of the political decisions are made in Paris. I mean, it's not like Germany, for example, that has the federal setup, or like Spain that has more autonomous regions. It really is quite centralized. However, this is, I wouldn't say changing, but there are some. I mean, there are obviously industry clusters all over France. In the Toulouse area, that's where you have the aviation, the clusters. Around Lyon, Grenoble, there's a lot of biotech and pharmaceuticals and transport, and there is. I mean, there is a tendency with the Parisian exodus right now, which is even stronger since the pandemic, and people discovered that it actually working from somewhere else. So there you see a lot of relocation to cities that have a lower cost of living, a higher quality of life, according to some people, and so on. So there's quite a large tendency to move from Paris to Bordeaux, Nantes, Lyon, and other areas of France. So there might be a shift in this occasionally, but when it comes to the decisions and the HQs and the political decisions, these are still made to a large extent in Paris. And we mentioned that there are about 600 Swedish companies that have their own structure in France. So I mean, most of these are probably familiar to you. We also, of course, have a lot of the smaller companies that are established, and there's a large number that we actually don't have of companies present through distributors and other types of partners, of course. So it's a very well-established market for Swedish companies. So when it comes to doing business in France, so we also performed the business climate survey in France, and with the good results. I mean, even better results than last year, which is maybe not such a surprise. If you look at the number of companies that were profitable, for example, last year compared to the year before, it's a lot higher. It's actually 77% this year as opposed to 65% the year before. And there's also a larger share of the companies that are communicating that they're intending to increase investment in France and increase their activities here. There's also quite, like I mentioned, there's a quite positive view on Swedishness and Swedish business in general. So many of the companies that we've spoken to also feel that the Swedish brand contributes to their business in France, which is of course very positive. So yeah, when things are looking up, and Sweden has had a stable reputation for a long time, along with the other Nordic countries, of course. So yes, can go to the next slide. So this is something that I mean, the differences when it comes to business culture are quite large. And this is something that has not changed much, actually, in my time here. It's also something that's of continuous importance to bring up with people who have had limited contact with the French market before, because the way of approaching formalities and the way of doing or conducting business is quite different, actually. Like Sophia mentioned from Germany, there are some typical typical differences. So, for example, in the French business culture is generally more hierarchical, and management is very important to include. I mean, it's very important to, even if it's not necessarily the person who has the knowledge about the issue, it's very important to have the formal manager on board if you want a decision to go through. So you might discuss something with someone who knows everything about your product or your business, but if you don't have a decision maker on board, you might not. You might be wasting some of your time. And then, I mean, in order to process these decision makers, the lead times are generally longer. But then, once the decision is made, you can assume that it's I mean, it's with the right person, so to speak, and you can assume that it's valid. So there's a lot of top-down decision making in France, as opposed to the consensus culture that we're used to in Sweden. This is something that, I mean, the fact that the French like a good discussion. There will be, I mean, it's very important to be able to argue your point. This is something that you learn very early on in school, the way of presenting your arguments. I mean, just from a private settings, I mean, if you go to a dinner in France and just discuss something, I mean, it's happened on several occasions that someone, if you're discussing a topic, someone will just change their opinion in order to have a more interesting discussion. So that's, I mean, this is something that's also shines through. I mean, it's very important not to be afraid of and avoid conflict, because it's part of the discussion. And then when it comes to, I mean, there are differences in the way of, you know, being present at the office and working longer days and so on. So that's something to be mindful of. This is, of course, changing a little bit with more people working at home, but not as much as in Sweden, I would say. So final slide. So just like Sophia mentioned, titles are very important. You use a title and last name for someone that you don't know. Absolutely use vous, so the you plural form, and not tu, which is absolutely, this is something that you do at a very advanced stage of your relationship with someone. So for example, if you have a title, just like in Germany, for example, like a doctor or maître for a lawyer, you have to use them with the last name. And if there's no title, we use Madame or Monsieur. So if you call someone, we use Madame, Monsieur. It's very, very important in emails and so on. We don't use first names. And when it comes to language, discussions are usually conducted in French. This, of course, is changing. It depends very much on what industry you're in, or what sector you're in, and sometimes also the age and the profile of the person that you're speaking to, of course. And so, but you cannot assume that your counterpart will speak English. When it comes to formalities, I mean, for the meetings that actually take place in person, formal attire is expected. And while punctuality is a bit more approximative in France than in Sweden, one should not be late, but one should definitely not be early. So, and then we have, just very, very briefly, we wanted to present an initiative that we are working on jointly with Germany, which is actually a project that is initiated and funded by Vinnova. We are currently building a trilateral business innovation platform between Sweden, France, and Germany, where we aim to facilitate and promote the creation of innovation projects with participants from the three countries within the three prioritized areas that are smart health, smart mobility, and smart industry. If we go to the next slide. So we can actually skip to the next slide, so we don't. So the point of this platform is to build on or to leverage on the bilateral innovation partnerships that are in place between Sweden and Germany and Sweden and France respectively. There is a political will and a will within both all three countries to collaborate on these issues, and this is one way of leveraging on that, I would say. So what we're trying to do here is that we're focusing on certain areas in which we aim to build working groups that we will help to gain access to complementing actors to build viable consortia to benefit from this proven collaboration concept that we're using, the multiple helix approach, and also to help these working groups find funding for their projects. If you go to the next slide. Here is a bit of a sort of process description that I think that what we can come back to that. If there is anyone here listening in who are interested in hearing more about this, or maybe even joining one of these working groups, feel free to reach out to me or Sophia, and we will describe more about the actual process.
Yes, that was everything from Business Sweden. I think we'll need to pass over to Ekkono, but you have our contact details in this slide.
Thank you so much, Emma and Sophia, for your presentations. I see that we have a question from Eric, but I think that we will first go to Jon from Ekkono before we go to that question. Again, it's in the chat. Please, Jon, the floor is yours. We want to know the experience from scale-up side of what you have been doing and how was it, just to give us a presentation around that.
Sure. Thank you, Stasha. So my name is Jon Linden, CEO, co-founder of Ekkono Solutions. Prior to that, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been in the tech industry pretty much my entire grown-up life, primarily in the telecom space, and primarily been looking westbound since we've been establishing my previous companies in the United States and in the Silicon Valley region. But now we're focusing very much on industrial applications, and then it was very natural for us to look southbound and looking at Europe as our home market and growing south from Scandinavia. So first of all, what we do just to kind of position the company, Ekkono is a software company. It's based on over 7 years of university research at the University of Borås on predictive modeling, so machine learning. And what we have enabled is that you can run machine learning on board, even tiny connected devices. So the controller of a pump or the gateway of a vehicle or something similar, PLCs, whatever, to self-learn those local conditions in which every individual product operates, and then use that for the purpose of doing predictive maintenance, condition-based maintenance, or self-optimization. So we address a lot of different industries. And one thing, I mean, now Sophia stole a lot of my thunder, as you will see, because I think that there are good reasons why we have the same experiences, because when we started looking at Germany, or DACH, as we define the region as, then we worked with Business Sweden. We did a project together with Business Sweden looking at things like where to locate the company, etc. We also had some good assistance from the German organization called GTIA, which is actually providing free services, which is very good complement to get like a German perspective on things. So that's something I can also encourage that you have a look at as a complement to Business Sweden. And then we had Ignite, which was kind of the trigger for actually making the decision to go to the DACH region, as we did some matchmaking at the Hanover Fair. I think that was 2019. And then it was pretty obvious that there's a good product market fit with what we do for the German market. We saw that there are some interesting things related to Sweden, Germany. For example, I mean, Swedes have a good reputation in Germany, so it's a good starting point. And Swedish references work very well. And of course, we have a lot of similar industries. We work with automotive. We have Volvo as a customer. We have Seft, Geely. Those work very well as references to the German equivalents. So going into the OEMs and going into the suppliers in Germany, they were very good references. We have industrial companies like ABB, Alfa Laval, Sandvik as customers, work very well with going into the equivalents in the German market. So Swedish references work very well. This is not, for example, my experience when it comes to the United States. Even if you have a Volvo or an ABB as a customer, they go, okay, cool, good for you. But who's your US reference? They're much more focused on the US market. So that's a privilege we have going into the German market. But we did run into some challenges. And the first one was exactly and this is the funniest ever, what Sophia pointed to, the German banana, how you can even come up with a name like that. But it is obviously an official name for the different financial regions, and they made it complicated to decide where do you locate the company. And I didn't think that was going to be an issue at all. Where do you register a company? I mean, who cares? We live in a virtual world, but obviously it makes a difference. So we did a thorough review of everything from Hamburg to Düsseldorf to Frankfurt to Munich, and eventually we ended up in Bavaria, mainly based on the fact that most of our customers are in Bavaria. So that was an interesting experience that I actually had to consider where to locate the company. Once we did that, it came to number two, and Germany is a well-developed country, but there are some things that are a bit conservative, including like company registration. I had to fly down and actually sign papers. I was sitting actually with the lawyers, and they were reading the entire document for me out loud in German and English. Not very exciting. And then eventually we signed them, and we were done. Now the tricky part was actually to get a bank. So that's something you should really think about. It's not as easy as you think. As we used to in Sweden, basically we can get everything done online with Bolagsverket, registering the company, setting up a bank account, and off you go. There wasn't a bank that wanted our business, not a single bank that wanted our business in Germany, because we're basically just a cost. It doesn't really generate any benefits to them in the short-term perspective, and that was the struggle. We ended up, just so you know, and this is something you can take with you, to actually use a Swedish account, a Euro account to do the registration, and that works. But it was a hassle that actually consumed quite a lot of energy and time to just get that done. But other than that, I think that the similarities are probably bigger than the differences when looking at Germany or DACH compared to Sweden. But of course, you have to consider the differences. And again, Sophia pointed to one of the things that was pretty obvious in my experience. The way we do business in Scandinavia, and also my experience of doing business in the United States, to a large extent, is about creating relationships. They can be pretty easygoing, and you can kind of connect. You don't really do that, at least not to start with. In Germany, you are formal. You actually address them with Herrn Doctor and the last name and everything else, and of course people are like people in general, also in Germany. So you meet all kinds of people, and you have those that definitely have adopted a different way of doing business, but in general it is a much more formal approach. And I also realized that even though in retrospect we would not have had to register a company, we actually have a subsidiary, a GmbH in Germany, which we in retrospect didn't have to do. But what we really want and what you really need is to consider having someone on site, someone local who speaks the language, who understands the culture, who can really engage with the people in the right way to establish that kind of trust and initial relationship. If you can find someone who is a contractor, that is preferred, because otherwise you have to register a company and go through everything that has to do with that to be able to hire someone. But you don't really need it for the purpose of invoicing customers, for example. Most of it you can channel through your Swedish AB and keep it simple, because we're part of EU. So that was one experience, and that's something that I think can be very good to bring with you. But don't underestimate the value of local presence and people who really understand the culture when it comes to the German market. So stricter. The other thing that we also found, and what we did, we tried pretty much everything, as you can tell. We've been working with Business Sweden, GTIA, we went to Hannover Fair, Ignite Sweden. We also did the accelerator program called Startup Sweden, Tillväxtverket and the Chamber of Commerce. And one of the takeaways that I hadn't understood before, but that I realized was very true, is that Germans have a tendency to focus much more on the individual benefits, not as individuals like what can I walk away with from the office, but what is my responsibility here at work, and how can I make sure that I deliver on my responsibility? Because going into a large company, we work with Infineon, we work with Siemens, and you think that, you know what, this might not be totally 100% applicable for you, but for the company, this could be awesome. And you could introduce us to that opportunity, and that would just fly by them. They wouldn't care. It wasn't on their agenda. It wasn't the priority. First of all, you have to focus on what is the person in front of you, what is the driving force, what are they accountable for, what are they being measured on, and once you've done that, then you can proceed and think about other things you can do with the company. But you really have to consider the counterpart as an individual and what they're being accounted for. Like Infineon, we work with one product division, and they have 4 or 5 different major product divisions, but they're really only interested in the part that has to do with embedded semiconductors for the automotive industry, and then we have to resolve that. Then we can use them as a reference to proceed. But talking outside that is not really relevant in those discussions, which was an interesting experience in my book. And then the last part that was also part of the experience is something that Sophia also mentioned, the Mittelstand, the hidden champions that you typically talk about in English, because they are very hard to identify from here. I can say that most of the companies that we are engaged with and talking to at this point in time are companies that I wouldn't find, that I didn't know of before going to the German market. And we found a few different initiatives, including like Ignite and the Chamber of Commerce and so forth. They're very hard to identify remotely, but they are big companies. They are like billion euro revenue companies, and they are really attractive customers. And that's a very good starting point, because going into Volkswagen with 300,000 employees is extremely hard. Finding the right person who has the mandate to make a decision is almost flat out impossible. So the Mittelstand are really the key to success in Germany, in my experience. I could probably go on forever, but I don't have that much time. So I'm gonna stop there. Take it for what it's worth. These are pure personal experiences and things that we have seen when entering the German or DACH market. But in conclusion, it is a very good first market step for us. And since we are targeting markets with a lot of product OEMs, DACH is first, followed by France and Benelux, and then Italy as we expand going southbound. So it's a very natural expansion for us, and it's something I would definitely encourage all Swedish companies to consider when it comes to international expansion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jon, for this, and Emma and Sophia. Very valuable to gather all this information and conduct it. We all play different roles on this. We try to create these commercial collaborations, but we have also our partners, Business Sweden, who can onboard you, give you the insights, and have an offer for you to access the market in that matter. And of course, hearing your journey, Jon, doing this is very important, and understand what you did and what maybe you didn't do or you wanted to do, or do some don'ts in this matter. The time is running up. We have one question. Maybe Sophia and Emma, you can give us some insights from Eric. Could you give some tips of how to create or start up good collaboration with French company, not a corporate, but French company, in overall matter?
Well, I would say that it really depends. I mean, the key issue here is finding the right partner. I don't know if you already have that company in mind, but the most important thing here is choosing the right one. Is it the one that actually accesses and has a good reputation and sells to your prospective clients? I mean, what is their position in the value chain? What is their reputation? I mean, is this the good partner for you? Do they have a good product fit that complements your portfolio and your products and solutions and so on? I mean, this is all. I think this is like first key, and then of course make sure that you have agreements in place and that everything needs to be drafted up by a lawyer and so on. Try not to fall into the exclusivity trap too early before you have proof of how well this partner is functioning. We can continue this discussion also, Eric, offline, because I'm sure if you have any more specific information that you would like to talk about.
Thank you so much, Emma, for the answer. The time is running up. I think with respect for that, we can close this session.